you have a lot of guns pointing at each other, and a ceasefire without going a little bit further would have been tough. Russia has the advantage, as you know. They have encircled about 2,500 soldiers. They are nicely encircled, and that's not good.
President Donald Trump's decision to impose new tariffs on Mexican imports marked a dramatic escalation in the already fragile trade relationship between the United States and Mexico. This move sent shockwaves through the economy, especially the automotive sector, which is one of the most deeply integrated industries across North America. Just as tensions seemed to peak, Mexico retaliated decisively, halting the exports of critical auto components to the United States. The effects of this retaliation are profound, and the long-term implications of these actions could send ripples across the entire continent, severely impacting manufacturers, workers, and consumers alike. The automotive industry's deep integration between the U.S. and Mexico. For decades, the United States and Mexico have maintained a highly interconnected supply chain, essential to the functioning of the automotive sector. American automakers have come to rely heavily on components produced in Mexico for their production processes. From small parts like wiring harnesses and brake components to entire engine assemblies and transmissions, Mexico has become an indispensable partner in this supply chain. The geographical proximity of Mexico to the United States, coupled with lower labor costs and robust infrastructure, made it an ideal location for manufacturing and assembling auto parts. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, which was later replaced by the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, only cemented this relationship, fostering the creation of cross-border supply chains that have been honed over decades. The integration between the two countries has made the automotive sector one of the most successful examples of international collaboration, with plants on both sides of the border relying on each other's contributions for smooth operations. Mexico's retaliatory action. A strategic move. Mexico's decision to halt the export of key auto components to the United States is far from a symbolic gesture. It is a strategic and calculated response aimed at applying significant economic pressure on the U.S. This retaliatory move comes in the wake of the tariffs that were introduced by President Trump, which had already strained the relationship between the two nations. By targeting the automotive sector, Mexico is leveraging its position as an indispensable supplier of parts, knowing full well that any disruption in this supply chain will have immediate and far-reaching consequences. The automotive industry operates on a just-in-time manufacturing model, a highly efficient system that allows for minimal inventory and ensures production lines continue running smoothly. This approach relies on a consistent and predictable flow of parts from suppliers. Any interruption in the supply of critical components can cause immediate delays in production, which, in turn, leads to financial losses and disruptions in employment. Mexico's decision to halt exports has forced U.S. manufacturers to confront this vulnerability head-on. The immediate effects of this disruption are already visible. Immediate impact on U.S. manufacturing. The consequences of Mexico's decision have been swift and severe. American auto manufacturers, such as Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, which have extensive production facilities both in the United States and Mexico, now face unprecedented challenges. The loss of vital components from Mexico means that these automakers can no longer rely on the efficient supply chain they have come to depend on. Within days of the halt in exports, several plants across the U.S. have been forced to shut down, with workers sent home due to a lack of parts to assemble vehicles. This disruption has hit states like Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky particularly hard. These regions, which house some of the largest and most important auto assembly plants in the country, are seeing their production lines come to a grinding halt. Thousands of workers who were once busy assembling vehicles now find themselves without jobs, and uncertain of their future. The financial strain on these workers is immense, as many of them rely on their steady wages to support their families. The ripple effect of this disruption reaches beyond the workers themselves, as entire communities that depend on the success of the automotive industry now face economic instability. Strained dealerships and rising prices. The disruption in production lines has also caused a sharp decline in the availability of new vehicles at car dealerships across the United States. Dealerships that were already grappling with inventory shortages, a result of lingering supply chain issues from the global pandemic, now face even greater difficulties. With fewer new cars available for sale, dealerships are struggling to meet customer demand. This has led to a sharp increase in prices for both new and used vehicles, as consumers find themselves competing for a limited supply of cars. The shortage of new vehicles is not just an inconvenience for consumers, it is also a significant financial burden. As prices rise, many consumers who were already hesitant to make large purchases due to economic uncertainty are now being priced out of the market entirely. The used car market, which had already seen price hikes due to the pandemic, is experiencing another surge as buyers who cannot find new cars turn to second-hand options. This additional strain on the used car market has led to further price increases, exacerbating the affordability crisis for American consumers. Financial consequences, stock market reactions. The immediate disruption in production and the ongoing uncertainty surrounding trade relations between the U.S. and Mexico have also sent shockwaves through the financial markets. Investors, already on edge due to vulnerabilities in global supply chains, have become increasingly concerned about the long-term stability of the automotive sector. Stock prices for major automakers and related industries, such as suppliers and logistics companies, have already begun to decline. For the automotive industry, which has long been a pillar of the U.S. economy, the possibility of continued disruptions is causing alarm. Investors are beginning to reassess their confidence in an industry that has been built on complex and interconnected international supply chains. The uncertainty created by the trade dispute with Mexico could force investors to rethink their strategies, which may have broader implications for the economy as a whole. The risk of further economic instability is high, especially if this trade dispute continues to escalate. Broader economic ramifications. The consequences of this trade conflict are not confined to the automotive industry alone. Other sectors that rely on the free flow of trade between the U.S. and Mexico, including steel, electronics, and logistics, are also feeling the effects. The steel industry, for example, has long relied on Mexican imports of raw materials, while electronics manufacturers depend on a steady flow of components from Mexico's factories. The disruption of trade in one sector can lead to a domino effect that impacts many other industries, creating a wider economic crisis. American farmers, who export billions of dollars worth of produce to Mexico each year, are also concerned about the retaliatory tariffs that could follow. If Mexico imposes tariffs on agricultural products, U.S. farmers could face significant financial losses as their access to the Mexican market is restricted. Retailers, too, are worried about the long-term effects of the trade conflict. With higher car prices and reduced consumer spending, they fear a slowdown in economic activity that could affect a wide range of industries, from clothing and electronics to home goods and food. The political dimensions, protecting domestic jobs. The political ramifications of this trade dispute are equally significant. President Trump's administration justified the tariffs on Mexican imports as a means of protecting American jobs and reducing the country's reliance on foreign imports. However, the unintended consequence of these tariffs may be exactly the opposite. By disrupting the flow of critical auto parts from Mexico, American auto workers are now at risk of losing their jobs due to plant closures and reduced production capacity. This outcome undermines the very goals that the administration set out to achieve, causing labor unions and industry leaders to voice strong opposition. Labor unions, which represent a significant portion of the U.S. workforce in the automotive sector, are already applying pressure on the government to intervene and reconsider its approach. They argue that the economic consequences of this trade war are disproportionately harming American workers, and that the administration must find a way to resolve the conflict before it leads to permanent damage to the industry. These unions are calling for diplomatic negotiations and a reconsideration of tariff policies, fearing that a prolonged trade war could lead to mass job losses and irreparable harm to the manufacturing sector. A strategic deadlock. Mexico's confidence and the U.S.'s vulnerabilities. Mexico, for its part, appears to be in a relatively strong position. While the Mexican economy is undeniably tied to trade with the United States, the country has been diversifying its trade partnerships in recent years, strengthening its relationships with China, the European Union, and South America. This diversification has provided Mexico with alternative economic options, reducing its reliance on U.S. trade policies. In contrast, the United States faces a far more challenging situation. The depth of dependency on Mexican manufacturing capabilities means that any disruption to this supply chain is bound to have severe consequences. Even if the U.S. were to attempt to shift manufacturing operations away from Mexico, doing so would take years of investment and billions of dollars in new infrastructure. Many of the specialized suppliers in Mexico operate in industries that have no immediate alternatives elsewhere in North America. This makes it extremely difficult to replace Mexico as a supplier of key components without significant costs and disruptions to the manufacturing process. The road ahead: negotiation or escalation? As this trade conflict continues to evolve, the United States finds itself at a crossroads. The White House now faces a difficult decision: whether to escalate the confrontation further by imposing additional tariffs or restrictions on Mexican goods, which could lead to broader economic instability, or to pursue a more diplomatic approach. One option is to engage in negotiations with Mexico, seeking to resolve the dispute in a way that addresses the concerns of both nations while avoiding further harm to the global supply chain. The challenge lies in finding a balance that allows both countries to assert their economic interests without causing irreparable damage to domestic industries. The automotive industry, a vital driver of economic growth in North America, now finds itself in the middle of a high-stakes trade war. The decisions made in the coming weeks will determine the future of U.S.-Mexico trade relations and could have long-lasting consequences for the global economy. Whether through diplomatic negotiations, temporary exemptions, or a broader reconsideration of tariff policies, the urgency to resolve this dispute is growing. The question remains: will the two nations find a way to de-escalate the situation? Or will this conflict spiral into a broader economic crisis that reshapes the future of trade in North America? The financial market response to trade tensions. As the crisis between the United States and Mexico escalates, the financial markets have responded sharply, reflecting investor concerns about the long-term effects of the trade dispute. The stock prices of major automakers, once buoyed by optimism regarding strong consumer demand and a recovering global economy, have taken a significant hit. Automakers like Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, once viewed as stable investment opportunities, have witnessed their market capitalization erode rapidly. This sudden downturn reflects the growing unease among investors, who are now factoring in the possibility of prolonged production delays, higher operating costs, and reduced earnings due to the disruptions in supply chains. The crisis has cast a long shadow over the automotive sector, and beyond the immediate players in car manufacturing, the effects have rippled across a host of other industries. Steel and aluminum manufacturers, who supply the essential materials used in the production of vehicles, have also seen their stock values plummet as demand from automakers wanes. These raw materials are critical to the manufacturing process, and with fewer vehicles being assembled, the manufacturers that provide these materials are grappling with a sudden reduction in demand. Stockholders in these industries are becoming increasingly wary, and the cascading effects of the crisis are evident in broader market volatility. The larger impact on logistics and supply chain companies. Furthermore, logistics companies that specialize in transporting goods between the United States and Mexico have also been deeply affected. These businesses, which play a crucial role in the smooth flow of automotive parts, have seen a dramatic rise in delayed shipments, cancellations, and disruptions in the supply chain. Transportation companies depend on the steady and predictable movement of goods across borders, and the uncertainty surrounding U.S.-Mexico trade relations has made that predictability all but impossible. The transportation sector, which underpins so much of global commerce, is now grappling with logistical challenges that have left some firms with halted or rerouted shipments, leading to significant delays. The interconnectedness of global supply chains means that the effects of this disruption are not confined to the automotive sector alone. Industries far removed from car manufacturing are beginning to feel the impact. The rising cost of vehicles, in particular, threatens to have a wider economic effect, particularly on consumer spending. As vehicle prices climb due to production delays and supply shortages, consumers are likely to delay purchases or abandon them altogether. For many, the cost of a new car is a significant financial commitment, and with the rising uncertainty surrounding the economy, purchasing a vehicle may no longer be a top priority. This slowdown in vehicle sales, in turn, will have a ripple effect on a host of industries that depend on the auto sector. The insurance industry, which thrives on vehicle transactions, could see a slowdown in business, while maintenance and repair services might experience fewer customers as individuals hold off on car purchases. Car financing companies, which often depend on the volume of new vehicle sales to generate revenue, may also face significant challenges in maintaining profitability during this downturn. Potential consequences for the agricultural sector. While the automotive industry bears the immediate brunt of the trade dispute, other sectors are beginning to brace for the potential consequences of the conflict. The agricultural sector, in particular, is closely monitoring the unfolding situation, as Mexico is one of the largest buyers of American agricultural products. Every year, billions of dollars worth of produce, ranging from fruits and vegetables to grains and livestock, cross the border from the United States to Mexico. The stakes are high for farmers, whose livelihoods are directly tied to the ability to export goods to their southern neighbor. Farmers are already concerned that Mexico may retaliate against the United States by imposing tariffs on American agricultural products. Such retaliatory measures could have devastating consequences for American farmers, many of whom depend on exports to Mexico to sustain their businesses. If the trade dispute extends and tariffs are imposed on U.S. agricultural exports, the effects could be felt throughout the entire farming industry, driving down prices, reducing demand, and potentially leading to job losses in rural areas. The potential for retaliatory tariffs in agriculture could further strain relations between the two countries and deepen the economic challenges. These moves are particularly concerning for small-scale farmers, who operate with much narrower profit margins and may not have the financial flexibility to weather the storm of declining demand. Meanwhile, large agribusinesses may have more resources to mitigate the financial hit, but they are not immune to the broader disruptions in trade. Concerns for retailers and consumer goods manufacturers. In addition to agriculture, other sectors that rely on trade between the United States and Mexico, such as retail and consumer goods manufacturing, are keeping a watchful eye on the situation. Many American retailers and manufacturers source raw materials, components, and finished products from Mexican factories. From electronics to clothing, Mexico is an integral part of many global supply chains. Should the trade war continue, these industries could face rising costs as tariffs are imposed or as delays in shipments increase. The threat of additional tariffs on consumer goods, combined with rising production costs, could lead to higher prices for a wide array of products, potentially reducing consumer spending across the board. As prices increase for everyday goods, consumers may pull back on spending, leading to a slowdown in economic growth that extends well beyond the automotive sector. The retail and consumer goods sectors, which are already grappling with supply chain disruptions from the ongoing pandemic, could see further strain if this trade dispute continues to drag on. The political landscape, growing pressure on the Trump administration. Politically, the Trump administration is under mounting pressure from both industry leaders and lawmakers to find a resolution to the escalating trade war with Mexico. Initially, the administration's strategy of imposing tariffs on Mexican imports was framed as a means to protect American jobs, bolster domestic production, and reduce the United States' dependence on foreign manufacturing. However, the reality of the situation has proven to be far more complicated, with unintended consequences reverberating through the economy. The automotive industry, a critical sector that employs millions of Americans, is now facing a full-blown crisis. As production slows, plant closures mount, and stock prices plummet, the administration must navigate a complex and increasingly volatile political landscape. Lawmakers from states with significant automotive manufacturing operations, such as Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky, are voicing their concerns and urging the administration to reconsider its approach. These lawmakers are particularly concerned about the impact of the trade dispute on the jobs of their constituents, and many are calling for immediate action to prevent further disruptions to the industry. While some politicians advocate for a diplomatic resolution to the crisis, others maintain a hardline stance, arguing that additional trade restrictions are necessary to force Mexico to comply with U.S. demands. The Trump administration finds itself at a crossroads. If the administration chooses to escalate the confrontation by imposing additional tariffs or enacting other trade restrictions, it risks exacerbating the situation and potentially driving the economy into a deeper crisis. On the other hand, backing down from the tariffs may be seen as a sign of weakness, particularly for those who view the trade dispute as a battle for American sovereignty and the protection of U.S. industries. The stalemate, Mexico's response, and future strategy. On the other side of the equation, Mexico has made it clear that it is not willing to back down easily. While Mexico's economy remains deeply tied to trade with the United States, the country has been diversifying its trade relationships in recent years. Mexico has been actively seeking to expand its economic ties with China, the European Union, and South America. This diversification strategy has given Mexico greater leverage in negotiations with the United States, as it no longer relies solely on its northern neighbor for economic survival. Mexico's decision to cut off auto exports to the United States is a clear demonstration of its resolve. While Mexican officials have indicated that this move is not intended to be permanent, they have made it clear that it is a calculated response to U.S. tariffs. Mexico is signaling that it is willing to play the long game, putting pressure on the United States by withholding vital components for the automotive industry. In doing so, Mexico is also highlighting its ability to shift its economic focus elsewhere if the situation does not improve. The possibility of Mexico strengthening its relationships with other countries, particularly in the automotive sector, could have long-term consequences for U.S. dominance in North American auto manufacturing. If European and Asian automakers follow through on plans to increase their presence in Mexico, the U.S. may find itself facing stronger competition in the global auto market. The uncertain road ahead, a delicate balance. As tensions escalate between the United States and Mexico, the international response to the dispute is also intensifying. The European Union and Japan, two major players in the global automotive industry, have urged both nations to seek a diplomatic resolution to avoid further economic fallout. Canada, which shares strong trade ties with both the U.S. and Mexico, is also watching the situation closely, as its own automotive industry is deeply interconnected with the trade relationships between the two countries. The stakes are incredibly high, not only for the automotive industry, but for the broader global economy. The longer the trade war persists, the more severe the consequences will be for both countries. With supply chains disrupted, production halted, and consumer prices on the rise, the situation is becoming untenable for businesses and workers alike. The path forward remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. The decisions made in the coming weeks will determine the future of trade relations between the United States and Mexico and could reshape the dynamics of North American manufacturing for years to come.